Hello and welcome to Philm Puckery, the unhinged podcast where I romanticize the villains, ship anything with queer attention, and obsess over films that are either genius or deeply cursed. Sometimes both. I'm your host, Spencer Jones, and this season we're diving headfirst into the chaotic comfort that is the MCU. As usual, we'll be talking about villain effectiveness, gay undertones, logic holes, and the most chaotic moment. I have changed CGI to technicalities, I guess is what I'm going to call it, because I realized I don't care about CGI as much as I thought I did. But I do care about like the cinematography, the actors, costumes, set design, stuff like that. I'll talk about CGI a little bit sometimes when it's like breathtakingly beautiful. So I guess technicalities. This week we are talking about Thor, the first one. This movie, it's not one of my favorites, but I do always forget how good it is. It's in the back of my mind. It's kind of one of those movies that introduces our characters, and it's not the best Thor movie, I would say, but I do always forget how good it is. I'm not a big fan of rewatching the introduction movies, I suppose, besides Iron Man. That one I watched a lot, but all of the other ones, like the Captain America, Thor, obviously Hulk, I just don't rewatch them a lot because I'm like, I know these characters already, you know? So let's talk about the villains. This movie introduces one of my favorite villains, Loki. I have the softest spot in my heart for that boy. I love him so dearly. Tom Hiddleston, what a good casting choice. He plays Loki so perfectly. Like, wow, I can't think of anyone else who would do him justice. I love him so much. And Loki as a character, yes, he's kind of a dick. He's mischievous. That's his whole thing. But I think he's funny and I think he's cunty. I like his little, like, his hair's always slicked back. I love the way that he'll flip it sometimes. And just the faces he makes. That initial scene where we're first seeing them and Thor and Odin are like yelling at each other in his treasure room about how the frost giants got in. And Loki's just in the background all wide-eyed and he's like, I don't want to be a part of this. He's taking in the information, right? He's concocting a plan, but he's staying in the background. And he's like, I'm just a fly on the wall. So Loki in this movie, though, I'm wondering because as a baby, he kind of masked himself to look more like an Asgardian and less like a frost giant. So he went from blue to like skin color. Because obviously that was like a defense mechanism, his masking. And I'm wondering if he feels that still, or I guess if he's been doing it since he was a baby, it's kind of like second nature to him. Poor Loki, that must be really tiring, actually. And he didn't know he was a frost giant, but I feel like he kind of suspected something was off. And then when the frost giant touched his arm and he turned blue, he was shocked, but he was like, yeah, I know. I feel like that confirmed his suspicions. He's always felt like an outcast. He's always felt like the least favorite when obviously everybody loves Thor. I just have such a soft spot for him, I think, but I feel so bad for Loki. Like, he didn't get the love that he felt he needed. Like, Frigga loved him, his mom, but somebody hugged that boy. It must be so difficult when you feel like your brother's the favorite and you feel like you never got the love that you needed or deserved. And like Odin and Frigga loved him and Thor really does love him. But I feel like Loki needed more, especially when Odin has technically been raising both of them to be kings. But Loki always knew that it was going to be Thor. He always knew that Thor was Odin's pride and joy. And I feel like in a culture that's so greatly emphasizes the need for fatherly love and acceptance and emphasizes strength, I would imagine firstborn becoming king, there's an emphasis on that in their Asgardian culture. And I feel like how sad of Loki to have to grow up in Thor's shadow the whole time. And granted, he's not following through in a healthy, productive way. He never got therapy, probably. It's not his fault. He's very smart, though, and that's why he can be so mischievous, because he plays life like chess. He's always 3 to 6 steps ahead. It's actually crazy. I do think it's funny how sweet and simple Thor is in this movie. Like, the point of this movie is that he learns and understands the way that the world works and people work. Like, he can't just be big and strong and stupid. To be a good king, he has to understand people and like consequences. That's the point of the movie. But I think it's so funny how in this movie, he's just a sweet, simple boy. And I think the contrast of that and Loki being so incredibly smart, it's just very brains and brawn. And I find it really interesting. It's kind of sad to watch the way that Loki manipulates Thor, though. He's smart. I love my boy. I'm so proud of him for being that smart. But poor Thor, he puts so much faith into Loki, and Loki's burned him countless times, and Thor just keeps trusting him. Like, that's just his nature. And it's kind of sad to watch because Loki's using reverse psychology. He's like, well, all you could do is defy father. but you can't do that. You can't do that though. And Thor's like, oh, great idea, Loki. Let me do that. And he's like, no, no, no. But that was his plan the whole time, my devious boy. It's kind of telling of Thor's character, the way that he never really learns that Loki is going to stab him in the back continuously. Loki has shown his true devious self to Thor, I'm sure many times. But Thor just loves and trusts him falsely so deeply. It doesn't matter if he was adopted technically, that's his brother. And I think that's really sweet. And I do love that Thor never really gives up on Loki. I feel like a lot of people have. I wish that Loki had felt this, but I think he's just like a traumatized boy. He is loved. He really is. And I think that they could have shown it better to him, and that would have saved us a lot of trouble in the MCU. But the scene when Odin and Loki are yelling at each other right before Odin, I'm assuming, has like a heart attack or a stroke or something. I don't know. He like falls to the ground. Anyway, before that, when they're yelling at each other and Loki's like, what am I? Where did I come from? Why did you take me? And Odin is describing how Loki was Laufey's son. He's a frost giant. And during the war, whatever, he took Loki in, and Loki was like, why would you do that? And Odin was like, you were just a baby, but I love you as my own son. And Loki's like, just fucking tell me. And Odin says that he wanted to unite the frost giants and the Asgardians, which I think it was a good idea, but poor Loki, when you already feel like you're unloved, when you already feel like the outcast, when you already feel like you're not worthy of anything. Yes, Odin loves him now, but the initial thought was to take him for a purpose. I guess it wasn't fully out of the kindness of his heart. And I think that that's really sad for Loki. I started watching the Marvel movies in order with one of my friends, and I told her how much I love Loki, and she just doesn't understand it. She hates him so much. I think we should all have a little bit more compassion for him. He's such a three-dimensional character. This is when I really start rooting for the villains, because he's not handling it well, but it's not his fault. He's got a lot of trauma that he needs to work through that he never really gets to, and that's really sad. It might just be that I have my own traumas, but there's such a big spot in my heart for Loki. And I know that a lot of people really do love him. And I think it shows just how much his character gets fleshed out. All of our previous villains, they've been getting better, but I feel like they were never really three-dimensional to me. They never really had the feeling behind them, I guess. But Loki does. I think that if he had been given the chance and given the tools he needed, he could have done better. I just think that no one really helped him. He is a trickster god. That's just in his nature. If he had been given the tools to maybe use his trickster abilities for good, he was like tricky and he was mischievous, and they're like, oh, Loki's gonna be Loki, he's just gonna do his thing, he's gonna be devious. I imagine they gave up on him, and that's why he is the way he is. When I say that he plays life like chess, what I mean is that he's really 3 steps ahead the entire time, because he gets Thor to start the war. He gets Thor to be banished. I don't know if that was intentionally, but I really feel like Loki knew everything that was going to happen. So he got Thor to be banished. He got Odin to be bedridden in some way. I don't actually know how, but he got the throne. And then he gets the frost giants to double cross the Asgardians. He's like, you guys can kill Odin, come in and do it, and then I will be king. And then he kills the frost giants that are trying to kill Odin. He kills Laufey. The double cross is crazy. And that was wild, because Loki's really been in control this entire time. I think it's fantastic. I think it's amazing. I think it's really impressive. When Loki sets up the Bifrost to destroy the Jotun and him and Thor are fighting, he says that the frost giants are a race of monsters, and he's got tears in his eyes, but he knows he's a frost giant. That's really sad. That's self-hatred talking. He just wants love. He just wants acceptance. He just wants to be equal to his brother. And then at the end, when Thor destroys the Rainbow Bridge and they're hanging off the edge, Loki's got those big, bright, sparkly eyes, my boy. And he's like, Father, I did it for us. And Odin's like, no, be nice to him right now. Are you kidding me? And then he falls. Well, he doesn't fall, he jumps basically. But my boy, all he wants is compassion, really. He's never good enough. There's tears in my eyes right now. I just can't even. Separate of Loki, who is, I would say, the main villain, obviously. Laufey is an extension of that, because he's using Laufey to get what he wants. That scene where Thor goes to the Jotun and he's talking to Laufey, and Laufey's doing that side-eye thing, and he's like in the shadows and it's all spooky. I think it's kind of creepy, but I think the side-eye he gives Thor the entire time is really funny. I'll talk about it later as well, but I think the way that they did the frost giant makeup is so intricate and it's so beautiful. Anyway, the Destroyer as well, the design is so cool, the way that they've done that, because It's like flames inside the destroyer and then it like shoots them out. But the metal is not really connected. It's just held together by the flame in the center. I'd imagine it has some sort of like a magnetic pole to the metal. But I think it's really cool because it moves in a way that the metal is just barely next to each other. They're not really touching. And then he's able to twist the metal to like move. It's so cool. Whoever thought of that is amazing. And then Agent Coulson and the other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents being like, is that Tony's? And Agent Coulson's like, I don't know. He doesn't tell me anything. So the destroyer, he's got fire inside of him. And I'm wondering if he's brought to life by the eternal flame. Because we see that in Thor Ragnarok. Hela uses it to bring her army to life and also Fenris, her wolf, which, by the way, I need that wolf. And then also it brings Surtur to life when his crown is put in the eternal flame. Anyway, I'm wondering if the destroyer is using the eternal flame because obviously he's not running out of fire. I guess you can't really run out. It just grows. I just feel like that was a cool tie-in for me personally because I remember that Odin has that in his treasure room. So this is just minor, but rewatching all of the early on MCU movies and seeing S.H.I.E.L.D. build and seeing all of the different people within S.H.I.E.L.D. and knowing who's a part of Hydra is actually really crazy because one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in this movie, he looks kind of shifty. It might just be that I know he's in Hydra, but that was really interesting looking back on it because I didn't know before. It was just some S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, but he was actually working for Hydra. And it's really interesting to see that being played out. So I am going to move on to gay undertones. The lack of romance in this movie, it's such a bummer to me. The gay undertones are not gay undertoning for me. It's such an action-packed movie, and they just really drive home Thor and Jane, which isn't bad. I think they're cute together. I think it was a little fast, but that's probably just trauma bonding. It's really mostly about Thor understanding how to be a better person, I guess, and understanding how to be king. So there's not a lot of romance in this, I fear. There's not a lot of subtleties either. The only thing that was like kind of subtle was Josh Dallas's character. I don't know his character's name in this movie, but Josh Dallas, he was Prince Charming in Once Upon a Time, if that's helpful to anybody. I feel like he really loves Thor a little bit more than everybody else. I just feel like he listens to Thor and he's like, yes, I will do anything you say, Thor. There's also that scene where Thor is cast out. Thinking it was Odin, they've gone to the throne to be like, oh my God, Loki's doing this devious thing and it's Loki on the throne. By the way, how isolating and lonely and terrifying that must be to be like, I'm going to go to the king to ask for help and the king is the person who you're going to ask for help for. Scary. Anyway, it's after that, and one of the other characters, he's eating a lot, and Josh Dallas's character is like, how can you eat when our best friend is cast out and Loki's a bad guy and he's on the throne, and he's just like going off on this guy. I feel like that was a little bit of undertone for me. Very minor, but I don't know. I think I'm grasping at straws at this point. I just really am needing something. I had to get super delusional for this one. I think that the Asgardian friend group, I feel like they have orgies. Because I feel like later in the MCU, Thor talks about orgies. I might be making that up. I could be completely wrong. But I do feel like they're all very close. Separate of this, Asgardians are all bisexual. I feel that deep in my soul. They're all progressive enough to not care. So that. And then Lady Sif, it's not really gay undertones. It's just gay undertones between me and her. But she's so badass. And what a feminist. That scene where Thor's trying to like get everybody to go with him to the Jotun. He's like, and Lady Sif, who raised you up when people didn't believe that a woman could be a fighter or whatever he says. And she's like, I did. And he's like, yes, but I supported you. Hell yeah, you did, Lady Sif. And hell yeah, Thor supporting strong women. I feel like Thor has always been a feminist. He's always been a protector of the gays. I just love the feminist aspect of that. But I do wish that we had gotten more of Lady Sif throughout the MCU. I feel like her character could have been fleshed out more because she's so cool. It's so badass for her to be with the men and have there be no talk of, except for that one scene of her being like, I proved everyone wrong. Hell yeah, you did. Bad bitch. But there's no talk of her being a woman fighting against men. It just is, and it's normal, and she's a part of the gang. And I really like that. And I wish that they had done more with her. But that's fine, I guess. So Jane and Thor. Not gay undertones, but it is the love interest of this movie, I guess. I don't hate them together. In other movies, I like them together more. In this movie, I just feel like it was moving very fast, and I do think it was trauma bonding, and that's accurate. I appreciate that. But the drama when Thor has just been hit by the destroyer and he's laying on the ground and it's so dramatic, we think he's dead. Jane runs to him, not caring about the destroyer, not caring about anything else. She's like, I have to be by his side. But that sacrifice makes him worthy of Meow Meow, of Mjolnir, Jonathan? I'm kidding, of Mjolnir. It makes him worthy. The scene is back and forth of Anthony Hopkins whispering into the hammer, and Thor is coming back to life, and the hammer is flying from the ditch. And then the hammer pulls him off the ground. And Jane's like, holy shit. She's looking at him and he's got all of his armor coming back on. He's this really cool Viking guy. And she's like, oh, thank God he's not crazy. And then she's like, she's for sure turned on in that moment. I know it for a fact. But you know what? Period. Good for you, Jane. When they kiss, though, I was kind of icked out. It was a very up close frame. And I feel like their mouths were open so much. They just went straight for tongue the first kiss. And good for you if that's what you want. It just was too much for me to be watching. But it's okay. It's okay. I also think it's so sweet towards the end when the Rainbow Bridge is destroyed, the Bifrost is closed. Jane is looking for a way to find Thor, and Thor really misses her. And then Jane's got this whole foster theory. What a bad bitch. And Thor is this god, literally. What a power couple. They're killing it. I'm so happy for them. Moving on to logicals, there weren't too many plot holes or inconsistencies in this movie with any of the other movies. I feel like they're locking it to the MCU now. Some of the things that I enjoyed about this movie, I do like that it links magic with science. I like that scene where Thor and Jane are sitting on the rooftop and he's got her book back and he's talking about how what her ancestors called magic and she calls science, where he comes from, they're the same thing. And she's got this theory and he's able to tell her that it's not a theory. He's able to be like, do you see what you're seeing? Here's what I was taught. I hope this helps you in your theory. I hope that this gives you more knowledge on what you're researching. I really like the way that they did that and the way that they were able to help each other. I do love the consistency of Hawkeye being the high up guy. He likes to perch because that's what he does, I guess. And I like when they're like, we need someone high up. He reaches for the gun and he's like, nah. Bow and arrows because that's his thing. And then he goes up high, and then in Avengers he's perched up high because he's got a better vantage point. I like the consistency of that, and I like that was, I'm assuming, in his training. I think he was training to be an assassin, right? Because him and Natasha, we'll talk about it later, but I like the consistency of that and his little arrows. I also like the dynamic of the Asgardian friend group. They're so badass in Asgard. They know what they're doing. They're strong. They're tough. And then they go through the Bifrost. They're in New Mexico and they see Thor and they're all goofy and they're so excited to see their boy and they're banging on the glass and they're like, Thor, hi. I think it's really sweet. And it is a reminder that relative to Asgardians, they're very young. They're like teenagers probably because they live for a really long time. So they're young and they have all of this put on them. They're doing well, I would say. I think it was really sweet that they showed a different side of them because they're just excited to see their buddy. And they're just like goofy teens in their little friend group, teens in quotation marks, obviously, in their little friend group. And they're just like so excited to be reunited again. I think that was really sweet. Logically, I do have some questions though. First of all, this isn't really a question. This is just a statement. The Bifrost is so unsubtle. Just in general, no sneak attacks can happen when you are traveling by Bifrost because you see the giant rainbow beam of light that splashes you down and then makes that giant Celtic circle. I don't know if it's Celtic, but that's my best way of describing it. So the subtlety is so bad. And then I feel like when the friend group goes to the Jotun for the first time with the Bifrost, I don't know if they were trying to do a sneak attack, but that's not the way to do it, especially in the Jotun when there's literally no light. Can you imagine living in all of that darkness and you're just like, oh my God, you're like covering your eyes, you're squinting because there's a giant ray of rainbow light coming down on the Jotun? Not subtle. There's got to be better ways. And I guess Loki found them for subtlety, but no sneak attacks possible traveling by Bifrost. Anyway, speaking of Bifrost, Heimdall, what a character. I love him. I do have a question though. He sees everything. I would imagine he's tuning in, right? Because it's kind of like when you're out in public and you hear everyone talking, but you have to tune into the conversation you're having, or if you're eavesdropping, which I don't do. Yes, I do. And you have to tune into that conversation, you know? I would imagine that's what it's like for him to like see all, because if not, no privacy. That's scary. And I guess as an Asgardian, if you grow up knowing that Heimdall's going to be seeing everything you're doing. Maybe you're used to it. It's not like a weird feeling of no privacy. Someone's always watching me. And I guess, hopefully, I'd imagine that Heimdall is tuning out of the mundane things like when you go to the bathroom, when you're sleeping, stuff like that. But I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of someone always watching me. The way that Heimdall is able to look at what Jane is doing, like what if he tuned in at a bad time for her? I just feel like that's non-consensual and that's kind of scary for Jane. I feel like Asgardians have consented to Heimdall seeing everything they're doing, but for him to look at everything, like if he was looking at me right now, I would feel uncomfortable with that. I trust him. I think he's a good guy. I don't think he's doing it maliciously, obviously. It's just a little bit too icky for me. Logically, Loki, he's holding onto the staff and he lets go and he falls, with the Bifrost also falling. Because he said that he knows other ways of getting in and out of Asgard other than the Bifrost. I'm wondering if he used the destroyed falling Bifrost to somehow work his magic and go to Earth, or if he still has a connection to Earth somehow. From when Loki is holding on to the staff and he lets go and he plummets with the Bifrost to the end credit scene that leads us into Avengers. I'm wondering, first of all, how that happened and then what happened in between that, because I feel like some time has passed. Thor is missing Jane and Jane is working on her foster theory and she's working on a way to bring him back and she's trying to find that way. That's a lot of time in between, I imagine. It had to have been enough time for Loki to be in cahoots with the people working under Thanos, unless he was in cahoots with them during the Thor movie, but I just don't imagine that he would waste his time with the Jotun and with Laufey and everything if he had already been working on things with Thanos. So I imagine maybe he's falling through space, he finds Thanos, and he's like a cockroach. He just survives. So he is like, please, I'll help you if you will give me this in return, because he just wants to rule. So he's like, Midgard's pretty stupid. I'll go there, I'll rule them. I want to know what happened in between that. I guess it's not important, but I know that Loki is sneaky and he is smart and he's clever. So obviously he figured it out somehow. I just want to know how and when it happened. The last logistic question that I have, when Thor finally gets his hammer and he's swinging it around and he's making that tornado and the cars get lifted up, who's paying for my fucking car? I can't handle it anymore. I don't know what it is about them loving to destroy cars, but stop throwing my cars around. I'm so serious. Anyway, moving into the technicalities, tone-wise, what a shift from both Iron Man's and the Hulk, because we start off, it's so regal with Anthony Hopkins' voice. He's narrating the beginning. The scenes are different, obviously, and now we're into this other realm. We've moved on from Earth, and yes, they go back to Earth, obviously, to New Mexico, but it's otherworldly beings now. It's not just a guy in a suit and a chemically made monster in quotation marks. So that is different as well. But Chris Hemsworth playing Thor, assuming some people don't know, I don't know. Costume wise, they did him so dirty in this movie because he's a good looking guy. I don't know what they were thinking, but I think that the eyebrows are too light. They fixed them later, but they did him so dirty. And his wig is not great either. He has better potential than what they gave him in this movie, and it's really sad. But it gets better and it's okay. I just feel bad that that's forever for him. And then also his facial expressions for slapstick comedy, I want to call it. I don't know. They're so perfect. I actually cracked up so much in these two scenes. The first one is when he's fighting everyone in the hospital and everyone's trying to take him down and he's like, you can't take down the mighty Thor. And they push him up against the glass and they inject him with a tranquilizer. I imagine something, the medical version of a tranquilizer. I don't know. He like slides down the window. The face he makes in that is so funny. And then also the scene where Jane is like, oh God, we got to find him. He escaped. He could be anywhere in New Mexico by now. And she reverses and she hits him with her car. The face he makes in that is so funny too. And I think Chris Hemsworth needs to get more credit for those because those were so funny. Back to the Frost Giants. I'm pretty sure most of the Frost Giants were practical. It was makeup and special effects and everything. I just love the way they look. They're not visually appealing to me. I'm not in awe of them as beings. I'm not like, wow, they're so beautiful. But I'm like, the way that they have made them look that way technically is very beautiful. Like that is an art form and I love it. I just wanted to talk about that because every time that a Frost Giant was on screen, I was like, wow, somebody did that. CGI stuff is cool too, and that takes a lot of effort as well. I'm very aware of that. I just don't understand how that works. So I'm not as in awe as practical effects and makeup things, because I'm like, I've seen people do those things and it takes forever, first of all. And what a beautiful art form. Anyway, looking at the actors, Idris Elba as Heimdall, perfect casting. I feel like Idris Elba, his voice, obviously, but also just him. He's so stoic. He's so ethereal. He's such a badass, and his voice is so smooth. It's so sweet. He's a perfect Heimdall. I love him so much as Heimdall. Anthony Hopkins, great actor. Super good. As Odin, the voice that he has is so regal. The way that he acts in this movie is so fatherly. I think that's wonderful. He acts so perfectly as the All-Father because he's such a dad, I think. Kind of in the way of he wants what's best for his sons, and he is willing to do what he needs to do to keep them safe, to keep them protected. He goes to the Odin to protect his dumb son who takes his friends to go start a war. But also he's such a good dad in the way of he's always yelling at his sons. It's such a stern dad. That one scene when he's yelling at Thor and Loki tries to interject and he just like screams at Loki. I feel like that was such a, I'm not saying good dad, but that was such a dad thing to do of like, I'm talking to my other son. But he doesn't need to say it. He just has to yell at Loki, and Loki's like, oh shit, my bad, sorry. Anthony Hopkins plays it really well. The last actor I want to talk about, the guy who plays Eric Selvig, is a Skarsgård. I didn't know that. I've heard a lot of people talking about the Skarsgård boys. I only know of Bill Skarsgård because I really like the It movies. But I've heard a lot of my friends talking about the Skarsgård boys and being like, I love them so much, and Bill's brothers and something, I don't know. But that was wild to me. Obviously, nepotism is a really big thing in media, but I didn't know. Like, I guess I don't think any of them look alike at all. So I'm not that shocked, but it was like, wow, when worlds collide. And it might just only be interesting to me, but I had to add it in there. Anyway, chaotic moment wise, there was no one specific chaotic moment that stood out to me other than maybe when Jane keeps hitting him with her car, but it wasn't a specific moment. But I will say there was a most chaotic character that stood out to me. And that's Darcy. I love Darcy so much. I watch WandaVision a lot, and I love her in that as well. But Darcy in this movie, the way they introduce her in the initial scene that we see her in, and Jane's trying to drive into the storm, and Darcy's like, I am not dying for 6 college credits. That's so real. And I really love her for that. She's so funny and she's so nonchalant. She was the only applicant for Jane's internship, and she's just there for college credit. She's a political science major, but she doesn't know the science that Eric and Jane are working on. She's just like there, just along for the ride, and she's just kind of chaos, but chaotic, neutral, and nonchalant. I just like her one-liners as well. The part in the beginning where Thor has just been hit by Jane's car for the first time after he comes down from the storm, I guess, and he's laying on the ground. He just opens his eyes and he's breathing, and Darcy goes, does he need CPR? Because I totally know CPR. And then she tases him because she was like, what? He was freaking me out. And then they take him to the hospital, and she's like, yeah, but Jane hit him with her car. And Jane's like, yeah, but Darcy tased him. And she was like, yeah, I did. And she's proud of it. And then also the scene where S.H.I.E.L.D. comes in and takes all of Jane's equipment and takes all of her notebooks and everything, and just basically her whole life's research. Jane is freaking out about, oh my God, I have to start over. They took all my stuff. Who are these people even? Like, I don't understand why they would do this. This is my life's work. And Jane's like, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And Darcy's like, they took my iPod. And Jane's like, I just don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I don't know how to start this over. I have to get it back. And Darcy's like, I loaded so many songs onto that iPod. And Jane's like, can you just stop with the iPod, please? Darcy's so unaffected. And poor Darcy, like, why would they take her iPod? What is that going to do? Give her songs back. I would be sad too, actually, if someone took all of my music away. Because do you remember you had to pay for each individual song? It wasn't like an Apple Music subscription or whatever. I'd be pissed if I just bought all of those songs and they took my iPod. Damn. Speaking of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Coulson in this movie, I love his character. We all know it. But I really think it's funny when he's interrogating Thor and he's like, what military are you with? He's naming all of these things that in our world make sense. And in his S.H.I.E.L.D. brain and military setting makes sense. So Thor is really just in shock that he couldn't lift Mjolnir. But I also like to think that he has obviously no idea what Agent Coulson's saying. And he's just disassociating because he's like, I don't know what he's talking about. He must not be talking to me. And then also when Thor's got his hammer back and he's talking to Agent Coulson, and Coulson's like, I have to debrief you. And he's like, son of Cole, because his name's Coulson. that was really good. That was very clever, and I really liked that they added that in there. That is all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you'd like to follow me on TikTok or on Instagram, it's at PHILM PHUCKERY. I will end with a quote that I've written down, of course. And this one really speaks to me. It really does. And I hope that it speaks to you too. Odin says, "A wise king never seeks out war, but must always be ready for it." And I think that's really important. And I really think we should all take that to heart, because don't go looking for a fight, obviously, but always be prepared. A leader doesn't seek out confrontation, but is ready for it. If you are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, just know that this podcast exists on both as Philm Puckery with a PH for both. And I will see you all next week for Captain America and the First Avenger. Okay, bye.